So I'm going to attempt to make a Jungle Bassline Generator. I've got all of these bass samples in simplers. They're grouped in an instrument rack. I've mapped the release and the volume for each simpler, and then I've mapped the chain selector to Macro 1, grouped it all, saved it as one convenient device that I can just drop into tracks. Each sample is tuned as well to be playing back at C1 on a C1 MIDI note. These sounds all came from Jungle Warfare 1, which is a classic 90s sample CD for jungle music. It has all really usable kind of stock classic bass sounds, and we're going to work with those today. Here I have a Think Break 2. I've actually chopped this hit by hit so that each kick, snare, hi-hat has its own slice in a sampler. I will link below to videos where I show you how to do that. And essentially what we're going to do here is use the MIDI that this break is firing from. We're going to use that to trigger our bass sounds as well, but we're going to do some kind of MIDI effects trickery to get some more musical results. I want a self-contained device that I can just move between breaks that's just going to spit out nice rolling bass lines that work well with the track I'm creating. So the first thing we're going to do is just group this rack like that. We're going to get our Jungle Warfare basses tuned. We're going to pull it over, drop it in here. Now if I play back one of these clips, you're going to hear it spitting out MIDI, but it's going to be really low and inaudible. We could pull in a pitch device, maybe bump it up a couple of octaves, shift arrow. Okay, bit nonsensical, and perhaps it's going too quickly at points. It's worth talking a little bit about the genre conventions of something like jungle, and this happens across all kinds of musical genres, and that is the cohesion between the drums and the bass, between the breaks and the bass. You see a band or anything like that, you'll often notice the drummer and the bass player are working together, or they should be, as one tight unit. When the kick drum hits, you want that bass to hit. Not always, not in the case of kind of syncopated bass lines, but they need to work together as one tight unit. We're going to leverage that here, use that to our advantage. So a good place to start would be to have bass notes on every kick and every snare. Okay, that's happening, but we want to have a bit more fine control over the tuning of each note. So at the moment, it's kicking out a C1. We can actually use the scale device to kind of lock the range of notes that's being let through to the device the other side. So if I just shift arrow key up C1 and drop this range right down to 0, that's only going to let through MIDI notes that are playing at C1. You'll hear as well, we've got this kind of kick roll happening. And I feel that's happening a bit too quickly. It's on a 16th note grid here, and really that's going to be a bit too fast, and I want everything to be working over an 8th note grid. Generally, jungle bass lines, they're happening at a maximum rhythmic division of an 8th note or a quaver. Usually they're happening on the beat, on the strong downbeats, and occasionally in between, but all on an 8th note grid. Occasionally you'll get things happening a triplet as well, but again, it's marrying up nicely with the kicks and the snares. So I'm going to pull in this Arpeggiator. I'm going to set the gate to 99% and leave the rate at 1/8. Now this is going to say, whenever it sees something like this, it's not going to give us a 16th, it's just going to give us an 8th. So it sounds like there's actually 16th notes going on, but I have checked with MIDI and it's not happening. It's probably more easy to demonstrate with a snare, but we'll move on for now. So at this point, I'm going to try and introduce some tuning. We're in C at the moment, and perhaps that's not the best key for jungle. If I drop this down an octave to what is actually C1, it's just a bit low. So I am going to work in my favorite key, which is F minor. I just use this scale device to kind of keep things in check and lock nicely. In fact, we'll turn it off for now so I can demonstrate what I'm doing next. So we know we're getting a C1 passed through, we're getting a C1 spat out the other side. Let's just use the tuner to check what's happening here. Okay, it's close enough. I know it's reading C sharp, but we've got a pitch envelope on this 808. Okay, you can hear it's closer there. You can see it. I'm going to use a bit of music theory here. An F, a C and an F is a perfect fourth, which in semitones is 5 semitones. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're getting a C1 put in and an F1 spat out no quicker than an 8th note. So I'm going to turn the scale back on now. I'm going to do some more MIDI trickery, MIDI assigning. I'm going to take a bit of a compositional slant here and say, okay, on the kicks, I only want the tonic. I want the root note of whatever key of my track is in. I also want the fifth. I definitely want the fifth because the root and the fifth are very closely connected. I probably also want the octave. Maybe I want to introduce the fourth as well at this point, but generally, we will keep this. I do have a tendency to overcomplicate things. We're just going to work with the root, the fifth, and the octave. So I know my scales and my and a bit of theory and stuff looking at something like this. Essentially, a MIDI note is coming in and being locked to a scale note you specify with these blue blocks here. So just take my word for it if you're a bit unsure about the kind of steps in the scale. So we're looking for a fifth above an F, which is a C here. We've already got it happening there. Not many fifths really. Okay, so maybe we want 5 root notes, 5 fifths. I'd say that's probably too many octaves, so let's go for a fifth. Let's add one more and one more fifth. Okay, now when this gets MIDI through, it's always going to be locked to either the first, the fifth, or the octave above the root. I'm going to use a MIDI effect here, use the random. I'm going to leave it on 12 because it's going to work chromatically. It doesn't correspond to how many blocks we've got here. 50%. Okay, maybe we've got too many fifths and stuff going on. We want more octaves, or perhaps maybe we do want some fourths. Okay, how about that? Not bad. Pretty good. At this point, you could even just put in a new MIDI channel. Take the MIDI from our think break and just find our post effects. And we could start recording the MIDI. Pretty cool. Maybe you might want to adjust the velocities here. We'll find our little jungle bass is tuned. Go into here, turn this off. Nice. We can even play it with the MIDI clip we've got here, which is different kicks. Great. I mean, that's probably enough to kind of get you started. You could save a very rudimentary version of it. I'm going to take this a bit further now. I'm going to group this. So you could stop here and probably be quite satisfied. The thing about 808 basses is you want the simpler the better. Really. They work as what would be a really low kick drum in techno or something like this. They're very key to the rhythmic impetus of the track, and they can be bounding or they can be slow and kind of hitting you almost like on a wave every 8 bars. So less is more, really. I'm going to duplicate this pitch arpeggiator thing we've created. I'm going to switch things up here and I'm going to say, okay, I want you to be playing on this snare here, the D sharp 1. I'm going to knock this up, D sharp 1. Now the distance between D sharp, if we take this down and say, okay, at 12, this is a D sharp. The distance from a D sharp to an F is just 2. So now this is going to be spitting out an F as well on this snare hit. Very cool. Okay, but I'm going to add some more notes to our scale here. I'm going to want to introduce what I will do is just pull in a fresh scale device so that I don't make any mistakes here. I'm going to want to keep in our major second here, and our minor third here, and our fourth. I'm going to want to keep in our fifth. I don't really want what this is, which is a minor sixth. I'm just not going to use that. I'm going to want to keep a seventh in, and I'm going to want an octave. I thought that's great. We've got 2 minor thirds here. We've got 1 major second, 1 seventh there as well. So we're all good here. So we're sending an F through. We're making sure it stays on an 8th note grid, and then we're going to knock this chance up to 90%. So we're going to get more variation on this snare hit here. Yeah, lovely. That's really cool. You could call it done and group it and start mapping some controls so you can just put it in other breaks. I'm going to take it a step further. I'm going to go 1 more step here, and we're going to go with this final this snare on A sharp 1. So now go up to A sharp 1. I've just duplicated the previous A sharp 1. If I take this down, I know that's an A sharp. And looking at my MIDI keyboard, A sharp to C is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 17. Okay, that is a C. Oh no, we want to be going to an F, don't we? So we want higher up than this. There we go, 19. Okay, so now we have 3 MIDI chains that are all playing on different hits of the break that we've got programmed in here. And you could start recording the MIDI here and building up your kind of own bass lines that are all being spat out in time nicely and behaving nicely with our Think Break rack. I'm going to group this now and map some controls so that it can be self-contained and I can switch it and just put it on other breaks and move it about and try it in different configurations, because I want this to be useful. I want it to be musical, self-contained, so I can just chuck it on breaks, and it's useful to you as well. It's easy to quickly get out of control with these kind of MIDI devices, and we want this to be, turn that chance on again, we want this to be useful. I'm going to group this whole thing here with our Jungle Warfare basses as well. In fact, before I do that, let's just put that. Okay, now I'm going to want to map the sound. Yeah, map to macro 1. Now I'm going to want to be mapping the pitches. So I think what I'm going to have to do here is, yeah, map to that group first. Now I'm going to want to map the scale as well, so that we can quickly change our scale. I'm going to want to map the Arpeggiator on as well, just in case we decide that might be useful. I kind of know it is going to be useful. Certainly if you work on a triplet grid, which occasionally you might want to do. And again, we want this to be versatile and useful. This is all really complicated, but once you've set it up, you can just chuck it and use it on all kinds of things. Okay, and we're going to want to map this lowest as well, because we want to be able to specify what hit of the break that the bass note is playing back at. You could call this note 1, note 2, note 3, bass. Device on. We'll call this note 16. We'll call this hit 1, break hit 1, break hit 2, break hit 3. Alright, pretty good. Now I'm going to move them over to this rack here. Just going to work through them and map them to each of the macros. I'm going to want some more controls here. I know from developing this that it's useful to have a kind of pitch here. So if we work with a break where maybe the pattern's happening later in how we've chopped it, maybe there's a kick, higher up here. Maybe the kick's on G1. You've got other stuff here as well, but there's a kick here and you're working on a little pattern here and you want that to line up. So we can use kind of an override pitch. Let's just call it override pitch. Okay, good. And now I'm going to want to map the release and the volume. Okay, so we've got a kind of, let's rename it AW. Jungle Bass Generator. So how useful is that? Well, it's pretty useful. It works in F. I'm going to use these macro snapshots now to put down a kind of variety of useful keys. So we'll work F minor first. And we're just going to go up through the keys in semitones. So we're going to go from F, F sharp, G flat, G, G sharp, A flat, A. That's all we're going to do here. I know that this is all working nicely at F. I'm going to duplicate this and make this F sharp / G. And here we know we just need to move up an octave through each of these notes. Make sure this is a G, and we're just going to repeat this for each of the keys. So 18. Watching back the kind of first take I did of this video, I was like, is this just really too complicated? Personally, for me, I'm very happy to play in my bass lines, and I really like doing that. I think if you're not comfortable and you're kind of not sure where to start, this could be really useful for you. And I know from a few comments from students and friends that people struggle with all different kinds of things, and including the 808s and 808 bass lines. So this was an attempt to solve that problem. Also, I think there is merit in just seeing if something can be done for its own sake. You never really know what's going to be at the end of the corridor. You kind of have to go down it and you have to try different doors before you can find breakthroughs for other areas of music seemingly unrelated. Okay, I think I've got all those mapped. We'll just check them. Make sure they're moving up stepwise. 19, 16, 21. Okay, certainly close enough for rock and roll. We've got all of our macro snapshots here for the keys. You could go down to E if you want to as well. Duplicate this, and we'll call this one E. We'll drop this down, 16, 13, 18, E. Okay, Save that. There we go. Jungle Bassline Generator in a variety of keys. Save this. Let's test it out on some different MIDI. And by different MIDI, I mean different breaks. So I will just find a break from my library and pull it in. We'll test it on a couple of variations. Let's give it a go on an Amen. Okay, so we have the break here. It's chopped in the same way. Generally, this thing's going to work best with breaks you've chopped hit by hit. Oh, we have to save it. We did save it. Yeah, okay. Okay, now here we can demonstrate something interesting. I know the best kick in the Amen break is on a G1 because I've chopped this from C1 here. Okay, you can hear it happening now. So this is where this override pitch comes in. If I drop this down to a G1, okay, so now this is 1. The A1, so G1, it's up a tone, so if we put this at D, this is going to work with our snare now. Okay, there's a bit of kind of maths you kind of have to do with all this stuff, but just mess around. Got a D2 snare as well here, so that's going to be maybe an A. We can just mess around with the pitches here. Maybe we could have the Arpeggiator on here. What's this now? A1. Is that here? Yeah, there we go. Okay, pretty good. We'll try it on one more break. Now remember, if you want to record the MIDI for any of this stuff, you'll just need to get an empty MIDI track. Make sure you've set the routing up to be coming from the Jungle Bassline Generator. You can see it there, post effects now. These kind of four bar patterns are going to work really well here, and everything's locked to F. Yeah, great. You can just be spitting out these bass lines all day. Okay, we'll try it on one more break and then we will wrap things up. So I've got the same thing here. I've got a curiously named drum loop 16. I'm sure someone could tell me down in the comments which break this actually is, but again, it's hit by hit choppage. And this one's perhaps a bit more easy because we're starting on a C1. So as group, let's chuck in our Jungle Bassline Generator. Oh, I've called it Jungle Bass Generator. I want to rename that. We want Jungle Bassline Generator. We'll just put this in here. We'll work in F again. Now, I shouldn't have to change any of these kind of override pitches because we're starting from a C1. The Amen was a good demonstration of when you have to do that. Okay, we've got that kick there on that G, so we can make this, put this up to be a G1, or we could do the override feature again. I could look in the break and say I come on a D1 actually. Okay, let's just record this as well. Drum loop 16. That's great. Like that, exactly the kind of pattern I would write. If you're not comfortable with kind of doing these things and playing in the MIDI or even drawing in the MIDI, then this could help you. We've used it on this break. We could play it back on the Fink. Yeah, pretty cool. Works especially well with 808s. Let's have a listen again on this drum loop. Very good. You can even just save this MIDI effect rack and chuck it in front of your own tuned basses. As long as they're all kind of tuned to C1, each of the notes is tuned to C1 or C2, you can always drop it down an octave, then this is going to work. So yeah, thoughts and reflections on the Jungle Bassline Generator. It certainly kind of took a while to develop and solve the problem. How useful it is, I'm not sure. I think you'd probably be better off just drawing MIDI notes in on the root and the fifth and the tonic and the octave, and taking a chance to learn a bit of theory or using the scale lock function in MIDI notes. But like I said, you've got to kind of do these things sometimes to see if there's anything at the end of the corridor, see if it suggests some other ideas, and maybe you'll find it useful if you're chopping breaks like this, as I do all the time. Chuck it on there and it's going to spit out some really musical, usable bass lines. I'm going to put this on my Patreon now. Thanks to all of my Patreon supporters. Let me know what you thought about the Jungle Bassline Generator in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'll see you around.